I'm Pete Peterson, very grateful dean of the School of Public Policy here at Pepperdine, and it's a delight to welcome you here for this lunch and lecture with our Giles O'Malley Distinguished Visiting Professor, Dr. Lee Ohanian. I want to take a moment to thank two of our faculty who really organized this as a series, Dr. Jim Krieger and Dr. Luisa Blanco. This is part of the co-curricular programming that we offer here at the School of Public Policy. Obviously, our students learn a lot inside the classroom, but we're also a place that brings in experts on particular policy issues. And it's hard to think of a more important set of policy issues than what the state of California is facing. I certainly don't want to impinge on the time that Dr. Ohanian will be presenting, but just as a quick note, if you didn't know, the latest estimates say that after the 2030 census, California may lose between 4 and 5 congressional districts. And that is just reflective of the relative decline in population between California and other states. Where are those people going? Well, they're going to Texas, Arizona, and Florida, who are due to gain between 2 and 3 congressional seats in each of those states. People are indeed voting with their feet. But for those of us like myself, who's not a California native, but deeply loves this state, I think it's important not just to throw rocks at these problems, but to think about ways in which either our students or faculty and others, we can be a part of the rebuilding process. We do have an election year upon us in which California voters and certainly Los Angeles voters, as we think about the train wreck that is the LA mayor's race, will be making decisions. It's important to respond thoughtfully and really from a basis of considered public policy. And that's why I'm just so delighted that Dr. Ohanian is with us. He again is our 2025-2026 Giles O'Malley Visiting Professor, taught a course on California policy this past fall semester. He's full-time faculty at UCLA and also a fellow at the Hoover Institution. I hope if this is your first introduction to Dr. Ohanian's work, you follow it, because he has been prolific in podcasts and essays and research, looking at reform ideas for California, again, not just as a way of critiquing the policies of this state, but as a way of thinking about reform and returning California to its golden state identity. So format for today, Dr. Ohanian's going to talk for about 3 hours. For about 40 minutes, and then we'll have some time for facilitating questions, and Dr. Krieger will be managing that. So without any further ado, please welcome Dr. Ohanian.
Thank you, Dean Peterson, for making this possible, and more broadly, thank you to Terry Giles for supporting Pepperdine and helping me bring here. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be part of the Pepperdine community this year. My Pepperdine roots go back surprisingly far. My dad was a psychology professor at Pepperdine back in the 1950s. I know that's hard to believe. I look 29, but he was on Pepperdine faculty for about 10 years. My wife has 2 master's degrees from Pepperdine. Former President David Davenport's a good friend of mine. We've been connected through the Hoover Institution. So it only feels fitting that I get to spend some of my time here at Pepperdine and be part of that community. So Pete, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of such a wonderful academic community. And it's great to see so many of my public policy 687 students, McCall, and I think Stephanie, I saw Stephanie earlier. I think Marvin is here, and Wyatt and Phil. So yeah, welcome. Some of this you'll have heard me rant about before. And sadly, I could talk for 3 hours. You wouldn't like that, but I'm gonna kind of concentrate my master's class in public policy 15 weeks into the next 40 minutes or so. So put your seatbelt on, and here we go. So I was born in California. I've lived outside California for grad school and then for some teaching positions. But growing up here, even as a little kid, my friends and I, we knew there was something special about this. The way the sun felt, the way the air felt, the mountains and the ocean. And, I grew up thinking like almost anything was possible in California. To give you an idea, in 1940, California had 7 million people. Just 20 years later, we more than doubled. And you can imagine what that does to state and local governments. Imagining today doubling in 20 years, and the public policy demands for schools and hospitals, roads, utilities, what is the state going to do? Because at that time, over 50% of California residents were under the age of 24, meaning they didn't pay a lot of taxes, if any, but they needed public services, particularly K through 12 schools. We were much poorer then. Our budget per capita, inflation adjusted in the 1960s, when we were seeing that just enormous growth, it was only about 1/5 of today's budget. So think about that. Just 1/5 of today's budget, inflation just per person. But somehow state and local governments found a way to get things done. They built those hospitals, they built roads, California Water Project, which today seems almost inconceivable to me to get that done in today's world. We did all those things on such a limited budget. It was a different government then. We had, in my opinion, exceptionally good principles of governance in place in Sacramento and throughout in state government. We were very efficient, very economical, very transparent, and we had to be, because we didn't have all that much money and people were pouring into California. Capital spending was as much as 22% of the state budget. In recent years, maybe 4%. Not even enough to cover depreciation. Right. And not surprisingly, we have an enormous deferred backlog of depreciation within the state on public buildings. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. Whatever we started, we finished. There was really there was no option. That hospital had to be built, that road had to be built, that school had to be built. Today we struggle with finishing things. We certainly struggle with finishing things on time and on budget. There is a real partnership between the public sector and the private sector, which sadly I don't see very much today. There's a lot more conflict between the public sector and the private sector. But the ethos of government at that time was, we are in trouble, we've got to get this state ready for all these new people, and there's no alternative other than constructing productive partnerships with the private sector. And it was never even questioned. And again, thinking about that 1/5 budget, 20%, we produced California schools at that time were the best in the country. Yes. The most innovative. The master plan for California post-secondary education, the University of California system, the Cal State system, the community college system, absolutely brilliant. And it's a model that was adopted in many other states. And we produced schools such as UC Berkeley, UC San Diego, just remarkable places of scholarship. and teaching. We created wonderful hospitals. I mentioned the California Water Project. We not only accommodated the growth, we blossomed from that growth. The dream came about because our governance and our government was so good. Everything I'm going to say today is, at least in my opinion, is very nonpartisan. I loved, as a student of economic history, I love Governor Pat Brown, whose son Jerry Brown was governor for us two different occasions. And Pat Brown was governor at this time that just people were pouring into California. And these are some quotes I've taken from his budget statements and some of the speeches. And you can see what his spirit was. We must invest to accommodate he called it our magnificent growth. That, going from 7 million people to 16 million people in just 20 years. And he said, government's priority is to protect and invest.
Oh, I like that.
And I think that is the principle where all good governance comes from.
Yes.
And I love this one. As a taxpayer, I love this one. And as a student of public policy, I love this one. We can't abuse taxpayers. He said we must use their precious tax dollars wisely. And again, this is 60 years ago. We were much poorer. And in fact, there's another quote I was going to put up here, but I ran out of room, where he said, taxpayers should understand that the rate of return they are implicitly receiving on our public sector investments is at least what they can earn in private markets. And that's just, that's just brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant to hear from a political leader. Every time I've shown these to economists, they just say, wow, where are these people today? And California flourished. I'm a kid of that generation. So that was the California I grew up in. So that was then, and what about now? So now, my opinion is California needs saving. And we can save. But here's just a little bit of why I think we need saving. We're losing important business headquarters. Some of the largest ones that I know you're familiar with include Tesla, Hewlett Packard Enterprises, Oracle, and Larry Ellison. Nestle's chocolate left. Toyota moved its U.S. headquarters out of California. Charles Schwab, Chevron, Palantir, SpaceX. And you'll notice that these are companies kind of across a wide range of industries. It's not just concentrated in one sector. And these, of course, are all big, very, huge enterprises, but we're not just losing the legacy businesses like Hewlett Packard or Oracle. We're losing some unicorn startups. So the model now seems to be, if you're a startup, if you're a venture capitalist, we start here in California, and California still does the lion's share of United States venture capital. And we get off the ground, and then once we have our wings, we go somewhere else. So many businesses have moved. Dean Peterson talked about Texas and Florida. They're also moving to Tennessee, where there's no state income tax, moving to Nevada. And these include businesses that are remarkably exciting. One of my favorites is a business that now has a proprietary way of recycling lithium and other rare earth minerals. So, you look inside your cell phone, there's lithium in there, Tesla batteries. They figured out a way to extract lithium and recycle it. And they moved to Nevada. So economic growth, there's always a story about not the giants, because they were the growth from before. It's about who's going to be the new giants.
Yes.
That's where economic growth comes from. So I'm worried that not only we're losing Tesla, but we're losing Aqua Minerals, which is the business I was just referring to. So businesses are leaving. We're losing private sector jobs. The data, the most reliable data on jobs takes a long time to come out and is revised, so that's why there's a fairly wide range here. But I'm drawing on numbers from the Legislative Analyst Office. Somewhere around 300,000 to 450,000 private sector jobs have been lost since late 2022, which is when private sector employment peaked in California. And here I'm using the term private sector the way the LAO does, which is government jobs, healthcare, and social assistance jobs. Their logic being that healthcare and social assistance are very, very connected and dependent on government spending. So, you know, that's a recession for the last 3.5 years. You know, as I said, as a kid, I thought anything was achievable in California. Prosperity's out of reach for too many of us in California. 1/3 of Californians live in poverty or near poverty. To put this in perspective, you know, I think about households with a total amount of resources equal to, say, $50,000, including earnings and in-kind benefits. About 25%, 28% of Californians live on less than $50,000, including benefits. And I just scratch my head and think, I just don't know how they do it.
Yeah.
Homelessness has risen in the last few years, despite record spending. Between 2019 through 2025, I think we spent about $30 billion. Despite that, homelessness is up. So these are all aspects of California that we need to address. I think we need some newer ideas than we necessarily see all from Sacramento. And we ask, okay, well, why are those businesses leaving, and why are people leaving? Well, housing costs. The median single-family home price in California is $850,000. Only 17% of California households are able to afford that home. And this home affordability statistic is constructed by the California Association of Realtors. What they assume in that calculation is a conventional 80-20 mortgage, 20% down payment. Well, only about, let me put it this way, the median net worth of an American household who does not own a home is $9,000.
Right.
So, you know, if you're a renter in California, good luck.
Right.
Good luck in being able to get this conventional mortgage. And it's not just purchasing a home. Rents are also high. The median California rent is about $2,700. Using the industry standard of no more than 30% of pre-tax income for rent means that renting that median price, a part of it, requires about $110,000 in household income, which is above California's median household number. Our energy costs, we have among the highest gas and electricity and natural gas prices in the country. And these are particularly burdensome for low income people. We have transportation issues. Our roads are among the worst in the United States. I've been teaching at UCLA since 1999, and it's the same pothole. There's the same pothole on Sunset Boulevard. As I pull out, I got to be really careful because, you know, Sunset's busy. It's just like, you know, the right bushings on my front. You know, it's like the mechanic and despite having the highest gas tax in the country, gasoline taxes, of course, in principle, as a public finance tool, gasoline taxes, you know, before EVs were in principle a great way to kind of pay for roads because, you know, the more you drove, the more gas you use, the more gasoline taxes you pay, the more revenue there is to fix the roads. But, that's not getting done. Poor roads cost California drivers thousands of dollars per year in higher insurance premiums and car repair costs. At one time, our schools were the best in the country, and the U.S. was the best in the world. Today, 70% of school children are below federal proficiency standards in math and English language arts. And we spend about $540,000 per classroom. The average classroom size is about 24, and we're spending now about $20,000 per pupil. So we're spending an awful lot, but I think we're letting our kids down. Some of our cities, particularly San Francisco, LA, and San Diego, they have certain neighborhoods that have extremely high crime, homelessness, and drug abuse. These are public health hazards in many dimensions and reduce the quality of life. Well, on the business side, we've looked at businesses leaving. Well, California is very high cost in terms of doing business. CEOs rank California invariably last in ease of doing business, and and we're competing with some strong competition such as New York, New Jersey, but we are always dead last. We're 48th in tax burden as measured by the Tax Foundation, which is a nonpartisan fiscal policy research organization. We're ranked 49th in business regulation by Cato. We're ranked among the worst in litigation costs. LA is the worst in the country. These are tort reform attorneys who make these rankings. So California has some wonderful aspects about starting a business here, including the amazing venture capital we have and the amazing universities and a lot of remarkably creative people, but we're making it way too hard and way too expensive for them to stay. My claim is that these aren't just like the weather, and many people I meet often treat California's issues such as high costs as like the weather. They'll say, well, what do you expect? This is California, or if you want the mountains and the ocean and the clean air, it's like, well, that's the price you pay for paradise. So I'm here to say that's not the way I recommend people think about this. These are all the consequences of policy choices because it wasn't always like that. And in fact, I'll just throw out one more statistic. During this remarkably rapid period of economic population growth, between 1940 and 1970, population rose from 7 million to 20 million. In 1940, the price of a California home was about 30% higher than the national average in 1940. Now imagine the population tripling over the next 30 years. Anybody want to guess how much that price premium increased? It was 30% in 1940. Anybody want to guess what it was in 1970? 30%. Didn't change. Didn't change. So when people say, well, prices are rising, home prices are more affordable because of demand, well, demand growth was nothing like it was back in the day. But we found a way to build houses at a reasonable cost. So these are all policy-related issues, and it's so interesting to do this in a public policy school and join with economics. Because there are many young people who are going to be the policymakers tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to seeing great things from this wonderful group of people. I often tell students one of the best things about being faculty is, and whether it's here at UCLA, I taught at University of Pennsylvania, one of the best things is that I get to learn from students. And they always say, well, what do you mean? You're the expert. You're teaching us. And it's very much a two-way street. And I learned an awful lot from my people in Public Policy 687 last semester here at Pepperdine. Okay, so how do we fix this stuff? Well, policies come from government. And at one time we had, I think, just brilliant governance, and today I think we have room for improvement. So here's 4 ideas. And you're gonna look at them and say, well, yeah, they're obvious. And so the good news is they're obvious. There shouldn't be any partisan debate about any of this. It should be like, okay, we're not walking across the street while the cars are going against us. To me, they're that obvious. Prioritize what Californians want. And that goes back to what Pat Brown said. We want to make sure our property is protected, our civil rights are protected. We want to make sure we receive quality public goods and public services at a reasonable cost. That's what government exists for, and that's what we want. Reasonable budgets, don't overspend. I'll show you some budget numbers here in a minute. But again, we built all those schools and hospitals and the California Water Project, and we expand our electricity grid on 1/5 of the dime that we have today. And I can't imagine what we would do if we suddenly were looking at enormous population growth coming to the state. I mean, I think we would just have, we would literally not know what to do. Rewarding innovation and quality. The interesting thing about the public sector is that it's not run like a business. And a couple slides later, I'll talk about how Pat Brown's government, and it just wasn't Pat Brown, it was a bipartisan area. He was a Democrat, he worked with the Republican Legislative Assembly and State Senate. They didn't fight each other. There were disagreements. There were respectful and civil disagreements, but they knew they had to get things done. There was simply no alternative to that. And there was an expectation and demand that if you worked in government, that you did a really good job and you thought outside the box. Because again, we couldn't have done what California did back in the day if we didn't think outside the box. I mean, if we thought inside the box, how would we ever produce the California Water Project?
Right.
So this is going to require restructuring incentives and accountability. And I'll talk more about that when we get to the resolution section. And then transparency. There was never any question about should government be transparent. Today we live sadly in a government that's oftentimes shrouded in non-disclosure agreements and a lot of opacity. Okay, so I'd like to think we all would consider these to be just obvious, like we don't walk across the highway when cars are coming. But I think we are. I think we are walking across the highway when cars are coming. Here's what happens when we don't have good governance. LA is building an 8-mile bike lane along the LA River for $1 billion. And for everyone here in the room, think about the most simple principle of economics: opportunity costs. Like, what could you do with those resources alternatively? Think about how many lives could be changed, how many roads could be fixed, how many alternative transportation programs could be funded for $1 billion. That's not a thing. We paid out $30 billion in fraudulent unemployment claims that were during COVID. And that was because we still have a 1980s level mainframe computer running the state's employment and development department using COBOL, which is a programming language from the 1950s, I believe. There was so much fraud that we had to take out a $20 billion loan from the federal government to replenish our unemployment funds. We stopped making payments on that fund. California was the deadbeat dad. We reneged. And what happens when a state government reneges on a federal loan, unemployment loan, is that state businesses now suddenly are paying higher unemployment taxes because we owe money and the federal government wants our money paid back. Example 3, we just got through building a new 911 system with the most technologically sophisticated state and the most technologically sophisticated country in the world. We built a new 911 system, it doesn't work. That cost $150 million. And it just puts us again in a situation where we have an inadequate emergency response system that we're going to have to wait more years for. And sadly, more lives may be at risk because we still have an analog system built on 1970s technology. High-speed rail. We're decades late. The original price tag was $33 billion. It might be as high as $135 billion. What we're building now is Bakersfield to Merced at a cost of maybe $35 billion. It might be ready 2035. Now I have no idea whether people are thinking about this or not, but the bond issue we passed back in 2008, which was a $10 billion bond to provide the seed money for high-speed rail. And then the sales pitch was, well, the federal government will give us some money and then private investors will come in because they're going to want part of this. It's such a wonderful project. Well, that money's gone. The private money never showed up. President Trump's administration just pulled back $4 billion in federal funding because of delays. And we just paid over $500 million of a penalty to a contractor because of delays. So imagine paying $500 million to somebody you hire because you were late. So again, we used to build things pretty much on time, pretty much on cost. Not here. Example 5. I talked about transparency. Well, there's in California, the fast food minimum wage is higher than minimum wages in the rest of the economy,
Right.
and that was written with a bunch of NDAs. Okay, so is that how we should be writing laws, with NDAs? And people we elect to the Assembly and to the State Senate, they're the people who are supposed to write the laws. The Service Employees International Union was the woman that was writing that law in conference rooms with legislators. They're an advocacy group. They're not supposed to write legislation. And everyone involved in that signed an NDA on the basis of the SEIU was not going to be part of that unless everyone did sign an NDA. This would have never happened back in the day. Our state budget's risen 74% in the last 8 years. From about Jerry Brown's last budget was $200 billion. Governor Newsom is proposing a budget of about $350 billion. That's just not sustainable. And as a consequence, we have chronic deficits going forward with no real plan to deal with those. And again, this never would have happened back in Governor Pat Brown's day. So I'm going to argue that all of these examples, and sadly I have a lot more of them, they're the consequence of just not having good enough governance. Can we restore it? Yeah, absolutely. We haven't forgotten how to teach kids. Only 30% of our kids are proficient. We haven't forgotten how to manage a budget. We haven't forgotten how to build dams or fix roads or put out fires. We haven't forgotten how to build houses at reasonable cost. We haven't forgotten about how to be transparent. We just need to restore the power of accountability and appropriate incentives so that people are rewarded when they do great things. That doesn't happen so much in government. Several years ago, I was asked to provide some policy advice to someone running for California governor. And, one of their political handlers came up to me, and I gave a talk, and one of their political handlers came up to me and said, you have just no idea that people they don't have any incentive. He was talking about Sacramento.
if you do a good job, you don't get a raise. If you go out of your way to do something different, make a suggestion, no, there's no incentives for that. But that's how businesses operate. The power of incentives I can't overemphasize, but they're not just present in state and local government to the extent that they should be. And that's something we can change just like that if we wanted to. Back in the day, principles of good governance weren't questioned. Why not? It's a totally different culture. The government was run much more like a business, because if it wasn't, we would have been in a lot of trouble trying to make all those things happen on 1/5 the budget. It was highly focused on its core functions, which was to protect and to provide quality public goods and services, and make sure we have the investments in place to accommodate that magnificent growth Pat Brown talked about. And here's something that really is, I think, important, and one that's really difficult to get around. Back in the day, there were far fewer influential political organizations amongst the US. We'll talk about that a couple minutes later. In my opinion, here's how easy in principle it is to fix some of our worst and most difficult problems. K through 12.
Yeah.
Our budget for schools, K through 12, is bigger than the total budgets combined for, I believe it was Tennessee, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. You combine those budgets, they're smaller than California's school budget. And the reason I picked those states is their population sums not quite to 39 million, but pretty close, 32 million. We spend an enormous amount of money, but we're failing. Here's a couple of data points that I think are just incontrovertible. About 15 years ago, Mayor Villaraigosa called a guy, his name was Marshall Tuck. He was a former Wall Street guy. He was super interested in school culture.
Mm-hmm.
And Marshall, who's a UCLA grad, that's how I know him, said, you know what? Let me try to turn around some of your worst schools. And so Mayor Villaraigosa did a deal. He said, here's these 5 schools. You don't have to be responsible to any union, any educational organization, nothing at all. You just manage them the way you do, because things can't get any worse. Well, within 2 years, graduation rates doubled. College readiness quadrupled. School culture totally changed. Parental involvement totally changed. No one ever thought this was possible. These were called Green Dot schools, and that program is now spread to other states. What did he do? He made some minor modifications. It's not that he eschewed unions, because there's a lot of discussion about teacher unions and education unions, and on both sides is controversial. What he said is, how are collective bargaining agreements hampering you to the faculty? So they did new collective bargaining agreements. And the teacher unions that are representing faculty in Green Dot schools today, 15, 17 years later, they're not the big teachers, they're not California Teachers Association. They are independent unions, and they work hand in hand with the management. A second data point, there's some charter schools that are generating amazing learning outcomes, comparable to the highest performing school districts, but at about 30% of the budget. These charter schools have waiting lists of over 1,000 families. And when I've asked the heads of those charter schools, they say, you know what, we're not hamstrung. We've got either our teachers aren't in a union, or if they are, we make sure it's a union that works for the kids. Teachers are very happy. Kids are happy. Teaching, contrary to maybe what you heard, teaching is the world's oldest profession. At some point, you had to teach the offspring saber-toothed tiger back.
Okay.
Gathering the spring good. So there's no particular miracle in learning how to teach. It's just recovering what we used to do. But replicating these success, or they seem obvious, but there's gonna be a lot of pushback. And in fact, Marshall Tuck ran for school superintendent in 2018. Because of our no party preference system, he was on the November ballot as a Democrat, and Tony Thurmond was on the ballot as a Democrat. Tuck wanted to change collective bargaining. He wanted to, he was a reformer. And Tuck lost about 49.6 to 50.2. And again, I'm not being pejorative here, but he got literally no support from his party. Literally none. All his funding came from kind of school reform associations. Housing affordability. As I was driving down here today, I'm on 101 and I'm going through Oxnard Camarillo, and I've been watching this development be built. And it's been going on for a long time because I suspect there were some lawsuits involved there. But a sign just went up saying, model homes now available for viewing. And these are houses, I don't throw as far as I used to, but if I have a rock and I was standing on the northbound 101, I could break a window in those homes. I mean, you're waking up in the morning and your view is the 101 northbound freeway. And I mean, the freeway is, it's a little past that wall, but from where I am, but not much. Those are $1 million homes. How do we build affordable housing? Well, we build where land is less expensive and use manufactured and prefabricated housing technologies, which are more than 50% less expensive. So we think about developing areas of California that are, 20, 30 miles away from the coast, where land is much less expensive. And I've penciled out, you could build 1,500 square foot house using manufactured prefabricated housing technologies, well under $300,000, probably about $220,000. And given California's median income of under $100,000, that home is affordable. But that's going to be fought. There's powerful environmental lobbies that essentially are saying, if there's property that's never been built on before, we don't want that to be built. We just want to continue making cities denser, which is fine. But we can't build affordable housing simply by making cities denser. Here's an example. Newhall Ranch. I wrote a column where I said, this was a number of years ago, but the column said the year was 1994. Blockbuster Video was the go-to entertainment solution for your family. 1 out of 8 families had the internet, and 1 out of 5 families had a personal computer. 1994. The first plans were submitted for that development in 1994. The first home sold 27 years later. And the cost savings that was going to be achieved was burned up in that 27 years. There was one environmental lawsuit after another. My classes heard me talk about CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act. There's been some changes to it over time, which are very welcome, but we simply can't litigate every new development. But a lot of elected politicians are unwilling to take on the environmental lobby because they don't want to be primary. Helping the homeless. In just the last few years, there have been 4,000 overdose deaths in San Francisco alone. And for every overdose death, there's about 7 or 8 that are reversed using Narcan. This is just a public health, this is the highest public health importance. The state operates according to 2 principles: housing first and harm reduction. Housing first is the idea we take someone who's homeless and we put them in a permanent housing, we put them in permanent housing. And harm reduction means that the use of drugs is something that some people in society are going to choose to do, and we should be focused not on trying to have them become sober, but just help them be able to do it without harming themselves and harming others. They certainly sound good. I don't think it's worked as well as the proponents had hoped. About a third of overdose deaths are in people who are in permanent supportive housing. Those who are chronically homeless, we do a pretty good job of providing temporary support for if there's a family where there's some issue comes up and a mom or dad and kids are displaced. We do a pretty good job helping out those people. The ones that everybody is worried about are the chronically homeless. They tend to be single males, they're over 50. They've had chronic severe mental health and substance abuse issues. So my thought is we shift from housing first and harm reduction to reallocate those resources to shelter and treat, in which we put these people in shelter situations, we provide them with emotional health support and substance abuse support so they get back on their feet, because we're simply not succeeding. And at the end of the day, living in a free society requires an enormous amount of self-responsibility, that you are responsible for yourself and your family, and that you don't infringe on others. So that very simple idea just has been lost within the way we approach homelessness. So I think the fixes are pretty obvious, but getting there is not so easy. So I think everyone, whether you're a person in business or government, you perform best when there's competition. There's very little competition in California from a political perspective. It's become a one-party state. And I don't say this in a partisan way, because I would be saying the exact same thing if this was a one-party Republican state. Lack of competition just doesn't bring out the best in us.
I know that's right.
And there's going to be even less competition in the future in California with the passage of Prop 50. And the voters spoke on that. I don't know if they were completely informed about how that was going to work, but we need to overcome this. And a lot of the lack of political competition comes back to those who would fight some of these reforms. The environmental lobby is going to fight housing reforms. Education lobbies are going to fight teaching reforms. But when government is focused and not beholden to those interests, it can do just amazingly great things. So this is the challenge. This is the challenge that we face. And the thing I worry about most is that we can always choose different elected representatives. What I find in California is that so many of us simply just don't have any idea about some of the facts I've spoken to you about today. In fact, I was at UCLA the other day, and for those of you, Victor Davis Hanson has been a faculty member here on the visiting professorship. He asked me, he was recovering from surgery, so he asked me to go on his podcast, which is seen by a lot of people, turns out, because one of my colleagues, so I spoke about California, some of these same issues I talked about with Victor. And so I go to UCLA the other day, and one of my colleagues said, hey, I saw you on the Victor Davis Hanson podcast. And now this is a UCLA economics professor, and he said, God, I had no idea how bad it was. And this is a UCLA economics professor. So when we're talking about a family where, the mom and dad are working and the kids are going to school, they don't have time to become informed about the issues. If we can help them become informed and help them hold elected representatives accountable, then we can turn this around. And we can save California. I think I've been yakking too long, so let me go ahead and I look forward to your questions and comments. So thank you very much.
So my one bit of moderation is, please ask a question. Don't make a statement.
Where do you see hope?
I'm a pretty optimistic person. I wrote an op-ed a while back, titled, "I thought California would save itself, I was wrong." Now that said, we do see some, I think, during the financial meltdown, Ben Bernanke said, "We're seeing green shoots come up." So the green shoots I see are some changes in voting patterns in San Francisco, which I think has just been, we ran the experiment of bad governance there. We elected a very different mayor, some very different people on the board of supervisors. Here in Los Angeles, we picked a very different DA. So when people really feel it, I think they do start paying attention, starting to vote. Some of the stuff I talked about here, I think is so far in the weeds, but they're important weeds, that, it's hard to connect the dots. It's become popular now in some circles. For example, the Democratic Party, there's a book called, Pete, I think, this Ezra Klein book was Abundance. And so I think one day we joked that it was the Democratic Party, and again, I'm being partisan, but they rediscovered Adam Smith from 1776. And yes, thank you for rediscovering Adam Smith and what a market economy can do. Governor Newsom was talking to Ezra Klein. I think Newsom has a podcast, maybe it was Ezra Klein's podcast. But Newsom was saying, yeah, these are great ideas. So I don't know. Well, we've got election year. One of the people running on the Democratic side, Matt Mahan, he's had a lot more success dealing with some of these issues. I think he's very thoughtful. I worry within the Democrat. I would love. I don't belong to either party. But I would just love a Democrat to come up to me and say, "Lee, I'm not beholden to the environmental lobby, and I'm not beholden. I'm beholden to kids getting a good education, and that's how we do things." I haven't seen that from him, but maybe.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Andre Edwards. I am a master's in public policy student specializing in applied economics, and I'm very appreciative of this opportunity that you shared with us. My question is, earlier you shared that 1/3 of attainment within the California dream is possible, and currently California is getting ready to open up a new position for the CEO's office, which will essentially be a mayor for the county. We are already struggling with the interconnectedness now of local government and state policies. And so I'm just curious to know, what do you think? One, we're already struggling with the budget issue, and so to open up a new position a new role, how do you think that's going to impact the future of the county with this new position?
Yeah, I used to worry about San Francisco the most. 6, 7, 8 years ago, I was really worried about San Francisco. I still worry about San Francisco, but I really worry about Los Angeles now. And so one reason being, LA County is so big. It's hard to think about trying to satisfy the very, very different interests and priorities and issues that people think about. The valley is very different than downtown.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could wave a magic wand, I would probably split the county.
Exactly.
I think, with budgets, I think governments are going to have to accept the fact that there's a lot of stuff we can do with AI that can make government just so much more efficient.
I agree.
If you think about the housing situation in Pacific Palisades and Altadena, and so few houses being restored. Just imagine just imagine using ChatGPT to take a look at some housing permitting issues. That's what this stuff is great for. Electrical check, plumbing check. It could go through that stuff in a nanosecond. But instead we've got very talented people, looking this over. And we can use those people elsewhere. One issue that as economists I hate to see, and politicians say it all the time. There's some groundbreaking ceremony, and it's like we're creating X number of good paying jobs. Well, that's not the role of government. The role of government is just to get stuff done on a budget. And, I talk to people about this, I say, 120 years ago, half of us worked on the farm. We needed half of us to work on the farm just to feed us. Today, 1.5% of the labor force is on the farm. Not that those people are alive anymore, but you get the picture. We release, technological change releases resources so they can be employed elsewhere. So I see remarkable opportunities for AI to help deal with budgets. LA County, LA City, and of course, the LA Fire Department's budget was cut relative to what they had asked for. And that might be one reason why there wasn't more pre-deployment of equipment and human resources. So anyway, I hope that helps.
Thank you.
So Francesco had a question.
Yes.
On the issue of homelessness and like disregarding perception, I guess, of the police in Los Angeles, the chief today, I think it was today or yesterday, came out saying they basically need 3,000 more officers to basically tackle like 40 phone calls addressing homelessness are getting every hour. How do you balance that budgetary need? So sort of just this need for more bodies out there with police officers.
Yeah. So we've got a policy environment in which, if you take an economics or public policy, you hear about Pareto improvements, which is about making everybody better off. And a while back, many years ago, I used to have a lot of libertarian friends, and I found that philosophy very compelling. But when you look at homelessness and drug abuse, it becomes much less compelling because these people aren't living their best lives. And nobody wants to wind up like that. So there are some constitutional issues involved in putting people who don't necessarily want treatment, putting them into treatment. There's a recent Supreme Court decision that makes it much easier to do that. It's perhaps the most difficult problem we face, but it's one in which I think the best we can do is get them into treatment. And if they're in a shelter, then the police resources aren't going to be stretched nearly as thinly as they are. So I think there's possibilities there.
Well, we are at the end of our hour, and I know at least some of our students have some classes after this. So thank you very much for coming. Since you mentioned Pareto improvement,
Okay.
we're going to create one for you. You created one for us. So both sides have benefited from this trade. So thank you.
Thank you very much.